knowing that there is only one life, one love, one heart, that is all that there is, that expresses as light and love and life and peace and power, beauty and joy. It is the power that is back behind all things, the source of all supply. It is God, it is Spirit, it is this divine presence, that ineffable singularity that reflects out in the multiplicity. And I know it, and I feel it, and I sense it in everything that I encounter, in everything that I see. And that black bear that ambles down the mountainside over pine needles and through bunches of rising grass. And the burst of azalea with shades of amethyst and flame, and in the wrens and finches, undemanding in attention, yet in their modesty belies all the miracles and revelations of this world and of creation. This divine presence is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. And as such, I must be part of it. I cannot be disconnected from it. There is no delineation of where that divine presence ends and where my veins begin. I am immersed in this ocean of pure being, bathed in the light of infinite understanding. This is the truth of me, and this is the truth for each one here in this spiritual community and out beyond as well. Each one here is not separated from the divine, nor could they be. Each one is a representation of all those God qualities in this physical form. They do not need to seek it out anywhere else. And so I speak my word for this spiritual community today. I know that the music that is played allows each one to rediscover their wings and take flight in this limitless world once more. I know that the words that are spoken uplift each one into a fuller, more joyous expression of their authentic selves. And I know in those interval silences that each one finds their deep peace and their source of strength moving forward. All is connected. All is one. And so I give great thanks for this. Thanks for the ability to commune with the divine in this way. Thanks for this spiritual community. Thanks for this word that is spoken. And thanks for the law that always says yes, that always affirms whatever it is given. And so I give over and I release this word into that law, knowing that it is done, knowing that it is so, and it was manifest before I even spoke these words. And I simply say, and so it is.
I have a nice talk all written, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this morning, as I was sitting in meditation, one of the things I did was I do a daily reading of Richard Rohr's daily message. And today is Pentecost in the Christian tradition that many of us grew up with. And I love Pentecost because it's to me, a mystical story. And so I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about that it's the mysticism of it and the story of it. And Pentecost, which is the descent of the Holy Spirit on the disciples, only happens in the Acts of the Apostles, which is written by the same guy who wrote Luke. Okay, so it's Luke, Acts of the Apostles. Any Bible scholar will tell you, we'll just call it Luke Acts. Right? Okay, so the rest of them don't act. They just, no. And so what I love about this is it's like a second baptism. So the first baptism is Jesus by John the Baptist. It's solo. He's by himself. He gets baptized with water. The Pentecost is considered the second baptism by fire and air and by the Holy Spirit. And it's a collective baptism. It's a shift out. The Buddha said that the next Buddha will not be an individual. The next Buddha will be a collective. And so it is a consciousness that we're taking on, that it's not just some solo person going to the mountain and hearing the message, that we all start to communally hear that. And so if you remember the story, Jesus has, the apostles and the disciples have gone through a bunch of change in the last, month and a half. Their leader gets killed. Their leader supposedly rises from the dead. By the way, this is all story. I'm not saying any of this is factual, so don't take it as reality. But rises from the dead. It's like they get a loss. They get a, oh my God, it's better than before. Okay? And then he leaves, right? According to Luke, he bodily ascends into heaven. Other gospel writers don't have that same story. But it's a good story, okay? So we'll just take it as the story. Yes? We good? Okay. And so they're grieving for 10 days. They're sitting in this upper room, which is a room, the lower floor would have been business or something like that. And there's this upper meeting room that they're sitting in, and they're praying for 10 days. Collective consciousness going deeper and deeper and deeper. This is why we come together in collective consciousness, to go deeper. And eventually, what happens is they get inspired by Spirit. And they call it, tongues of sort of like fire descend upon them. And they're inspired, and they go out, and it says they speak in tongues, which simply means they speak in language that everybody could understand. The Pentecostals speak in gibberish and call that speaking in tongues. That's not really what the Bible says, because it says everybody understood them. Right? Each in their own language. I have a theory about that, but I won't go into that. But this loss of their leader propels them into action, propels them into doing something new. Oftentimes in the ceremony for Pentecost, there's a little line in there that says, "Come, Holy Spirit." And Richard Rohr reminds us what we already know and what we already teach. It's here now. It doesn't have to come. It's here. And you and I are in it, as Tim so beautifully said in that opening prayer. The only difference is the degree that we know it, that we call on it, and that we consistently use it. It's the same thing that we teach in our teaching. There's this infinite presence that is available for us to use. Half the time we forget. Yes? Anybody besides me? Okay? Or we don't know it or whatever. And so the imagery of this Spirit is always dynamic. It's flowing. It's water, it's fire, it's air, it's movement, it's change. Yes? Spirit is dynamic. Richard Rohr says, if there's never any movement, energy, excitement, deep love, service, forgiveness, or surrender, we can be pretty sure we aren't living out of the Spirit. I'll say it again. Energy, excitement, deep love, service, forgiveness, and surrender. If our whole lives are just going through the motions, if there's never any deep conviction, we aren't connected with Spirit. Which leads into my talk today about the steps we take. And somebody already kind of stole my thunder a little bit. We're looking at a month-long theme of moving from good to great to grand, and out of a year-long theme of a grand rising, of lifting up into something greater than we've ever been before. And when I looked at the title of this, like I think it was Jim said, it reminded me of the 12-step program. And there's a lovely saying in the 12-step program that says, you can't take the elevator, you have to take the steps. Yes? A lot of us want to just take the elevator. Let's just go up there, but we got to take the steps. We can't just pray and meditate only. Our prayer and meditation must lead us to act. It's called Acts of the Apostles, not prayers and meditations of the apostles, right? Or contemplations. Paul says faith without works is dead. And so we have to move forward. And for those of you who are a little newer, we're not a Christian in that way denomination, but we pull from all religions. So that's what I'm pulling from this week. So last week we talked about our values. I want to just revisit that real briefly for a moment. All of our actions in life are driven by our values. Breathe that in. All of our actions in our lives are driven by our values, which gives us a clue, if you're like me, that not all of our values are wonderful, life-loving and affirming, life-affirming values. Because once in a while we don't act out of those kind of values. Yes? Anybody besides me? Okay, good. Thank you. And not all expressions, even of, quote, good values, serve the highest and best expression of life. Sometimes we use what's called unskilled means to achieve our values. Sometimes we wander into the shadow side of values. We might value love, but we substitute an obsessive need for attention and approval, making our feeling of being loved dependent on what we do rather than who we are, which is not really experiencing love. Many of us value comfort, which is good for a while, until it becomes a reason to not change, or until it becomes a reason to constantly indulge ourselves. Do you watch advertising on TV? How many times they talk about indulge yourself in this, indulge in this chocolate, indulge in this car, indulge in this, that, or the other. A little indulging is a good thing. A lot of indulging gets you diabetes, or broke, or whatever. And comfort can also move into a fearful obsession with safety. So it's important to hold our values gently and with awareness. You see, if we try to grab them or the things associated with them, it's like trying to catch a butterfly in your hand. And if you ever succeeded in catching that butterfly in your hand, if you ever chased a butterfly and caught it, you realize that it's no longer being a butterfly, is it? It's just kind of this thing that's fluttering in the darkness of your hand, but it's not out in the light shining its beauty, its beautiful wings. It's not sharing its flight. It's not being the butterfly. And so oftentimes we try to hold our values, grasp them really tightly, instead of giving them that flow, that free flow that they need. So we must let life flow. We must let it be for us to enjoy it. So the steps I want to talk about today come from the 10 steps of an organization called the Good Grief Network, which supports people through transitions and changes. Anybody notice there's change happening in the world? Okay. So life is change. If you don't know that, I'm telling you for the first time. That's why grasping too tightly on comfort and safety doesn't work, because life itself is change. Change brings in the new, but it also requires letting go of the old. And in order to change, we have to oftentimes cross a barrier, cross a desert, cross an ocean. We have to do something where it feels a little bit scary to go out there and do that, to let go of the old and move into the new. The Hindu god Vishnu represents the energy that both destroys life and creates life, often in that order. Destroys life, creates life. See, our intellect values sameness. Yes? Because it knows how to act. It knows how to process that. It knows how to maintain things. But as we know, life can't be controlled. The intellect wants to control everything. Just, again, look at the world. But life, capital L life, can't be controlled. And so we're constantly in this phase, and it's becoming so much more transparent in these days, we're being called to hospice what is ready to die. To honor it, to feel our feelings and yet let it go. And then we're being called to midwife what wants to be born. We're called to welcome the new expression of life. And we oftentimes find ourselves both grieving and celebrating at the same time. I really don't want to let go of this, but I'm so grateful that this is moving in. So the first of these steps is to accept the situation. Accept what's happening. Much of what we have taken for granted is ending or changing in the world and in our lives. The planet itself is going through a major shift, and because we're part of the planet, guess what? We're going through a major shift. Shift happens. It's been a bumper sticker for decades, and here we are. Additionally, our culture, our economic and our political systems are shifting and perhaps collapsing. Buddhist scholar and systems thinker Joanna Macy calls it the great unraveling. That's what we are living through right now, is the great unraveling. Shift is definitely happening. So we can either focus on the unraveling, or we can recognize that unraveling reveals something new. When things start to unravel, something new is being revealed. The poet Rainier Maria Rilke, late in his life, wrote this poem. He says, "I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know, am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? Isn't that beautiful? And that's what we're doing, is we are circling, we are shifting, we are expanding, we are changing, we are revealing something new that hasn't been seen before. This then leads us to our second step, which is being with uncertainty. Oh God. Again, for the controlling intellect, nothing is as frightening as uncertainty, yes? But as Pema Chodron said, if you're interested in security, you're on the wrong planet. Isn't that great? Many of us forget that certainty, what we've called certainty, is a privilege that is not experienced by a great portion of the world. We here in the northern hemisphere, in the developed countries, and the upper ends of the developed countries, I should say, take certainty for granted. And we get upset when it starts to unravel. But a great deal of the population of the world, including in the United States, is not living in certainty. Has not been. So the growing uncertainty that we're facing is a peeling back of the collective trance that we've been in. What Don Miguel Ruiz calls the domestication, revealing the deep truth that uncertainty is reality. Take a breath. If life has changed, that means that uncertainty is the reality. Again, we can face this with fear, or we can recognize that change is the reality. The principle truly is not bound by precedent, which is another thing that we've been saying all along. Principle not being bound by precedent means that it doesn't have to stay the same as it was. In fact, it won't stay the same as it was. And then we need to learn to surf, or swim, or fly, or somehow work with and be with this uncertainty. To learn how to manipulate through this, to live our lives through this. To flow with the flow, rather than getting stuck in attachment to our belief in what is. J. Krishnamurti said, one is never afraid of the unknown. One is afraid of the known coming to an end. One is never afraid of the unknown. One is afraid of the known coming to an end. Isn't that powerful? Spiritual teachers have taught us for a long time that this stuff around us is illusory. It's illusion. We think it's real, and it's not. I mean, there is a level of reality to it, but there's a deeper reality behind it that is constantly shifting. There's something bigger and greater and grander that we're being called into a deeper awareness of, and a deeper relationship with that, capital T, that, whatever name we give it, whatever description we have, living with answers like maybe and I don't know. You know, we like to think that we have to, I got to know everything. You know, people once in a while come up to me as a minister and say, well, what's the answer to this? And sometimes I just sit there and go, I don't know. 42. 42, yeah. Thank you. That comment was, this is why we don't clap for you. So we say we want change. We say we want a world that works for all, which means we have to change. Take a breath. That same Joanna Macy that I quoted before once said, the faster this society collapses, the better our odds of survival. Think about that. The faster this society collapses, the better our odds of survival. And that statement reminded me of one of my favorite Michael Beckwithisms, that a bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul. Bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul. So the third step then is to honor our own mortality and the mortality of all. I think it was Mary Morrissey who said that she was having a conversation with the guy who wrote Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. No. Huh? Yeah, Robert Fulghum, thank you. And he said, he had just had, and he was a minister also, and he said he just had a congregant come to him and say, I just found out I'm going to die. And he said he so wanted to look at him and say, didn't you already know this? Sometime we get a timestamp on it, or like that. But so to honor our own mortality and the mortality of everything. No form exists forever. Everything pulses into being and pulses out of being. Sometimes it's for a nanosecond and sometimes it's for billions of years, but everything pulses in, pulses out, comes, goes. The life impulsion itself is what is eternal. But the how it shows up in space and time is always temporary, always impermanent. The thing that we call permanence is only true in degrees. It's only true in relativity. Well, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who said something about, this may not always be our forever home, this building. And it's like, of course it's not going to be our forever home. Someday we're either going to expand beyond this, or we're going to go out of existence and we won't need this anymore. Hopefully it'll be our home for a long time, but there's nothing that's a forever home. We all want everything and everyone to live forever and never change. Right? But there's this desire. We all want people that we want to change, but we don't want to change. And we get this push-pull, yes? But forms never last forever. All of this then leads us to the fourth and the fifth step, which are steps that this teaching is pretty good about, and that is the fourth step is do inner work. Do our inner work. Become aware of it, and tied in with that is become aware of our biases and perceptions. To recognize that how we're viewing the world is through our filters. That's our lens. And to recognize that oftentimes we're viewing a mirror rather than something that's actually out there. It's the work that we do well. So the sixth step then is to practice gratitude, seek beauty, and create connections. The best way to pull out of a tailspin of fear, hurt, anger, and numbing about the world, how many of you can relate to that to some degree? Okay, is to recognize that change doesn't mean the end of life. It doesn't mean the end of spirit. It doesn't mean the end of reality. It doesn't mean the end of as Tim called the seven main aspects of God, the life, love, light, power, peace, beauty, and joy of the divine. That's always here. It's just finding new ways of expression. So just because change is happening doesn't mean the intrinsic spiritual nature of the universe is changing. It means the forms in the universe, the forms in our world, the form of our world is changing. And so to therefore use gratitude, use seeking beauty, use creating connections to always be present. We have to train ourselves to recognize those, even in the forms, even if the forms are different than what we thought they should be. Yes? It takes paying attention. It takes a willingness to say, I'm going to find the beauty here anyways, rather than listening to the news and getting all spun down. Yes? So gratitude, looking for beauty, creating connections. There's a story of a Zen master who was being chased by a tiger, and he comes to the edge of a cliff, and he has no choice. He's either got this tiger that's going to eat him, or he can jump off the cliff. He takes the choice of jumping off the cliff, and partway down finds a tree branch, a root that's there that he can grab onto. So he grabs onto this tree branch, and he's sitting there, tiger above, ready to eat him, long drop below, probably will hurt or kill him. And he notices that there's a mouse starting to eat away at the root over here. In the midst of that, he also notices that there's a beautiful, perfectly ripe strawberry on a bush right here. And he takes the strawberry, enjoys it, and goes, ah. That's being with the present moment. Chaos is always happening around us. There's always a tiger ready to devour us in some way or another, yes? You know, the end of the world has been predicted for thousands of years. Probably more than that we just don't even know of. You know, my friend Sandy Dell, who's our online, remembers at a previous church that I had a list of all the times that the world had predicted for an end. I had it on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper like this, and then I let it go, and there was 20 pieces of paper that draped, fell down, out of that. We've been told that the world is going to end. The world is going to change. The world that we know is going to end. Just like you and I are going to, as we know ourselves in this body and this experience going to end. But that doesn't mean life, capital L life, ends. There's something more. So, finding that beauty, being present with the beauty that is present right here, right now. And then connections, which she also talked about, which this group also talks about, help us to share the load. You know, the disciples, when they were gathered in that room, had connections. We do community here because we have connections. We have people to share with. We have people to walk this path with. One of my teachers used to say that we should always have somebody who's a little below us or a little behind us on the path that we can help along. A bunch of people who are around the same place in the path that we can walk along and share with, and a person or two who's ahead of us on the path that we can be inspired and pulled along by. Connections. Connections are so important. The seventh step then is to take breaks and rest. Yes. So as we work through this changing form of the world, self-care is critical. Critical. We carry a lot in our bodies, we carry a lot in our minds, we carry a lot in our hearts. Yes? Take a breath, just notice that. And we're no good to others if we're crispy critters burned out by all that we're doing, trying to do. So rest, not as a long-term avoidance, but rest as a way to reconnect with the source within is so important to us. The eighth step then is to grieve, to feel the grief, and where possible, acknowledge and repair the harm that I have done in the world. Whether it's to the world itself, whether it's to another person. But to feel the feelings and then do something about them wherever I can. The ninth and very important step then is show up. Joanna Macy says, of all the dangers we face, from climate change, from climate chaos to nuclear war, none is so great as the deadening of our response. None is so great as the deadening of our response. So show up. We can't just pray and meditate only. We must move ourselves. We have a saying here, treat, so do our spiritual mind treatment, and move your feet into action. But we move into action from our beingness to create a greater expression of the divine. So often people will get into action based on their anger, their reaction, I got to go do something about this out here, instead of taking time to go and say, but first, who am I in here? I've told the story of in the early 1980s, meeting a gentleman who had the same birthday that I did. And in his office, he had a picture, and he had been a leader of paratroopers in Vietnam. And he had a picture of his paratroop unit from back in the day. And they were all, these macho guys, and this wall had these studs coming out, and they're all perched up on the wall looking all tough and like that. And I'm sitting there, and I was a protester of the war. And I was kind of sitting there looking at that. I had a moment of judgment, and then I realized if you did a snapshot of all my friends who were opposed to the war, we'd have long hair and all that stuff, but we would also be just as tough, just as macho, and just as angry, making war against the people who were making war. Yes? So that's not the activism that we're talking about. We're talking about coming from our being, coming from, if we want peace, where is the peace within us, and coming from that to create peace. And then finally, the 10th step is reinvest in meaningful efforts. Create meaningful efforts. One of Margaret Mead's most famous quotes is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." This is the step where we take the journey of developing a relationship with ongoing and increased unpredictability, a journey that begins internally with realigning our mental, physical, and emotional programming, and we venture outward, returning to this chaotic, beautiful, broken world and practice heart and spirit-based activism. This is where we take action from the spiritual nature within us. And so as much of what passes for activism focuses on top-down politics, trying to get those people out there, the leaders, the ones that we claim are leaders. Who are really the leaders? We are. But the ones that we put up on a pedestal and say, those are our leaders, we try to get them to change, but they're so invested and caught up in agendas and greed and profit and all that stuff and self-preservation in what they're doing that they can't really make the change. They're too scared to. So true change will only come from bottom-up activism, from you and I changing, from our own grand rising and living boldly, from and as our highest nature. That's what will create change in this world. From living with compassion, love, and wisdom towards ourselves, towards others, and towards the whole world, including the non-human world, the more than human world. By asking, how can I best be of service to my community? And how can I best be of service to the larger earth community during this time of transition? We tend to think that we're small, have that, who am I to change the world? But the question is, who are you not to? Who are you to not change the world? Trees have this way of communicating with each other, and that the mother tree will send nutrients to young trees, young saplings, or to trees that are in distress. I learned a big new word this week, the mycorrhizal network, which is the network of fungi that underlies everything. It used to be thought that everything was just sort of independent, but I know that a couple of us were up at Lakewold Gardens this past week and checking that out, and the docent was talking to us about that interconnection of all the life, the tree life, the growing life. We are totally interconnected with each other. We need to recognize that our actions, whether they're uplifting or not, ripple out like that energy, like that tree energy, through the mycorrhizal network, or think of the concept of Indra's net, for those of you who are a little more into that. We are all interconnected. Whatever I do affects you. Whatever you do affects everyone else. It's funny, last week my next door neighbor, who comes here once in a while, said that for Mother's Day I had honored the mothers, and then I also honored the women who were not mothers to physical children, but had brought mothering energy. He took that idea out, and he leads groups for Panorama on walks, and he honored the women on those in those walks with that, and touched them, and said really touched them to be honored for who they were, even though they didn't have children. Little things. We touch, and we touch, and we touch, and we touch, and it ripples out. And so take actions that contribute toward creating or birthing a world that works for all. So our 2 spiritual practices this week. Number 1, truly be the change you want to see. Truly be. We use that little phrase, Gandhi said it, but be the change you want to be, that you want to see. Don't wait for somebody else. Apply these steps in your life. I saw a couple of people taking pictures of them, and they'll be on the website later this week. And then secondly, working from last week, I'd asked you to create a love list. What is it you love to do as a way of identifying what are your values? What is it that really is meaningful to you? So the second step of that is review the items in that list and then ask what you enjoy or why you enjoy doing what you do. So you might love cooking, And you can have a number of whys of loving cooking. You might love to cook because it creates connections with family and friends. You might love to cook because it's a creative expression. You might love to cook because you're growing and challenging yourself into something new that you're not really good at, but you're trying to get good at. Whatever it is. Find out, or you're hungry, yes. But there's a difference between just cooking to fill and cooking because I love cooking. And so create a list of those whys. And after doing that, for the more powerful things on your list, look for the patterns that are running through those whys. Look for things such as connecting, moving, problem solving, creating, etc. What are the patterns? What's the essence of what you love to do? And note the top 2 or 3 or 4 of those, and that's the thing that lights you up. That's your values that light you up. So that's the second part of that. And again, that'll be on the I think on the Facebook page. So I want to close with 2 quotes. The first one comes from Carolyn Mace from her book Sacred Contracts. And she said, "Once we are awakened to something, a truth or an injustice, we are held accountable and must take action according to that truth. We cannot ignore or suppress that awareness. There's no going back." As we grow in awareness of what's going on around us, we have a responsibility to start to shift the injustices and to start to express more of that which we really want. The second quote then comes from Joanna Macy, which is a beautiful quote. And she says, "To be alive in this beautiful, self-organizing universe." I think of Tim's opening thing about the bear coming down the mountain on the pine cones and the grasses. And it's like the mountain, the bear, the pine cones, the grass, all of it's one. All of it is interconnected. To be alive in this beautiful, self-organizing universe, to participate in the dance of life with senses to perceive it, lungs that breathe it, and organs that draw nourishment from it, is a wonder beyond words. You and I live in that. You and I live in that. Take the time to be aware of that. Don't let all the disasterifying that's happening on the news and the awfulizing that's happening on the news get you out of the fact that we live in a beautiful place, in a beautiful time. Yes, it's changing. Yes, it's shifting. And yet still life is. And we are. There's an affirmation that I'd like you to invite you to say with me. I take the steps towards which Spirit is calling me so that a more wonderful world may be born through me. Say it again. I take the steps toward which Spirit is calling me so that a more wonderful world may be born through me. And so it is. So you are. Thank you.